Now, it's clear that there are rights and interests in water for iwi and hapu where they can demonstrate them in terms of their treaty claims. But that's got nothing to do with pipes and wastewater treatment plants built since 1840. So what Act says actually is that the assets should remain with local councils. We should let them develop partnerships between different local government groups and make sure that the funding and financing arrangements are available so that the water can be cleaned up. Now, it came to the Hawke's Bay on an aeroplane today, but the woman I sat next to said actually her business relies on trucking to get seeds into the Hawke's Bay. And the Napier Taupo Road speed limit has been reduced to only 80 kilometres an hour. And that's adding about 15 or 20 minutes to each journey. And what that means is that's an additional cost to their businesses. And all of those people who depend on coming and going from Hawke's Bay down that Napier Taupo Road. Now, it's quite clear that government has taken hundreds of millions of dollars in road user charges and fuel excise duty from people who live here and who use that road, and hasn't spent even a fraction on improving that road. So reducing the speed limit to 80 kilometres an hour is barely a band-aid for what's actually needed, which is to spend money on road safety. And that means physical road safety improvements. Now, I asked a question of the Minister of Transport, how much of the money taken in terms of fuel excise duty and grants is spent on roads? And he told me over the next 10 years, it's only going to be 23%. So under this government, don't expect things to change. But ACT has some better ideas. You'll be hearing from David Seymour about that, I'm sure. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce David Seymour, leader of the ACT Party. Welcome, David.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Hey, thank you very much, Simon, and thank you very much, everybody, for coming out here tonight. It's real good of you to give up your Friday night and numerous social opportunities that political activists often find themselves with in order to be here. I want to just ask a little bit about who's here. In particular, who here is a net taxpayer? A group of people interested in it? Yeah? There's a lot. Oh, that's a bit better. I sort of gone to a Labour meeting by accident. How many people here are farmers or involved in growing food for other people? Yeah, a few people here. How are those electric utes going? You got those? Yeah. I'm sure that they're coming next year. How many people here are in business where either they're self-employed or they employ another person or two or three? And, yeah, a few business people, yeah. Okay, we got any students here? Yep, good on you. Always got a few students at an ACT meeting. It's good to see. I wonder how many people here. I asked them. I was in Whangarei. I said, "How many people here are racist?" It was supposed to be a joke. And some guy put his hand up. It's like, that's Whangarei for you, though. You know, it's his idea of a joke. Look, we'll try and just speed it up a bit by joining things together. How many people are either a member of Al Qaeda or a landlord? Because from the government's point of view, there's no difference. I tell you what, also I always thank people for coming along, and I thank Andy and some of our team that organise these things, and I'm very grateful that people do that. But I also just like to get a sense of what people's mood is. How many people, if I was to ask what your mood is towards this government, if one is, let's re-elect St Jacinda tomorrow, I wish the election could be brought forward so I can do it sooner, that's a 1. And a 10 is, I'm thinking about an armed insurrection. Do you have a training manual? Well, we'll give everyone a chance, yeah. So how many people are a 1? Anyone here? Yep, good on you, man. Good on you. And how many people are a 2? They're not entirely happy, but basically, yep, would like to re-elect St Jacinda. Okay, yep, there's a few 2s, thank you. How many people are a 3? Anyone a 3? No, a 4? Or this is quite polarised. Is anyone a 5, sort of in the middle, like basically not sure? Yep, okay, so maybe re-elect St Jacinta, but possibly not. You're up for grabs. I'm going to work extra hard on you. Cool. How many people are a 6 getting on the anger end? Yeah, any 7s? Yeah, there's a 7. You're just sort of mildly pissed off. Okay, fair enough. Is anyone an 8 that are getting up on the anger? Yeah. What about 9s? Yeah? How many people are a 10? Holy. Well, look, thank you. Look, I don't just want to... how many people were waiting for a 15? Yeah. Look, hey, how are you going? Good. Look, I wanted to just get a sense of that because I don't just want to thank people who have organised this and given up their Friday and come along. I also wanted to thank Jacinda for making it all possible. I mean, you think about it. Here we are in provincial New Zealand, 200 people coming out to see a politician from what they call a third party. Something is going on and something is not quite right. And the purpose of these meetings, that Simon and me and the other 8 ACT MPs have on our desks, or should do, is what we stand for and what we do. And we're in business, just like a lot of people have put their hands up here. And the business that we're in is the business of representation. The process of taking people's concerns and aspirations, the fat end of the funnel, and channeling them down into a political action program that we can make this ship go in the direction as approved of by the people who actually pay the bills. But the start of that representation process is getting feedback from those people who actually pay the bills. So that's what this meeting's about. And it's about something else. It's about the idea that people in a democracy can make a difference, that people can come out, express their views, have them represented in Parliament, and that actually this country can work out okay no matter how difficult it can seem. So there's an element of hope in it too. But it starts with a little bit of a spiel about why I think so many people are angry, what's happened over the last 2 years, and what needs to happen next. And then we open it up for a good old-fashioned town hall meeting where we'll let people get up, and sometimes just the questions that people ask actually help me to understand what's on people's mind and what needs to happen next. Sometimes it's the things people say, but sometimes just the questions people ask are indicative. So that's the sort of the second half of it. And we'll try to make the whole thing happen in less than an hour, because we do an email afterwards where we ask people to fill out a survey and give feedback. And some of the feedback I've had is, look, I like David Seymour, but he's definitely best in the first 4 hours of his speech. Like, after that, it's dragged on a bit. So we try and make it a 1 hour deal. And other nights it's gone on a bit longer. But we're not going to sort of try and imprison you all night. Maybe some people want to get out before the restaurants are finished. But if I was to sum it up, I would say that we had a government that is basically here because of a series of accidents. Does anyone remember Materia Ture? Yeah, I remember her. She taught me a lot about politics, because in the early days I'd go and debate her, and I would try to, try and sort of say, well, here's a problem, and we've got a solution, because I'm a recovering electrical engineer, and I'd like to design things for people, and she'd just get up and say, it's about our babies. I think, far out, why is she polling 15 times higher than me as she was at the time? She is an incredible master of emotional connection, but I don't think she ever solved a problem in her entire time, unbalanced in that sense. And you might remember that she blew up her career by claiming to have committed benefit fraud. And the Green Party actually got a massive bump in the polls. And that tells you something about the psychology and aspiration of a Green voter. It's like, well, you committed fraud. Oh, yeah, thank God. I wouldn't want a leader that had it. But they went up and they took a lot of votes off Labor. So obviously those guys are keen for some benefit fraud too. And that shocked the hell out of Andrew Little, who went and begged Jacinda to take over. People forget all this stuff. It's kind of interesting to relive it. And she became the leader 7 weeks before the election, reluctantly. And of course, as we know, the press went completely nuts, like a sort of a feast of piranhas, but sort of loving ones. And they promoted her and boosted her to up 12% without changing a single policy. Isn't that amazing? And that got them to about 38%, far short of being able to form a government. And then, you know who, Mr. Trustworthy, just said, actually, I would like to make you the Prime Minister. So that was the first accident. And then everything began to unravel because it was, you can't run the country from an Instagram account, amazingly. So the idea that we're going to build 100,000 homes, what a fantastic idea. We're short of houses. Imagine if we built a big number. What's a big number? 1 million, not quite plausible. 1,000 doesn't sound like enough. 100,000, that's how many we'll build, with absolutely no plan for how to do it. And Kiwi Build, it sort of became unfair for the opposition to criticise Kiwi Build because it was just such a joke. But if you think about everything else they did, mental health, they were going to solve that. They were going to make climate change this generation's nuclear-free moment. And of course, none of us realised it was going to be nuclear-free because we'd import record amounts of Indonesian coal and burn that at Huntley. And then there was the question of child poverty. We were going to fix that. We've got more kids living in poverty and going without the basics than ever. You know, everything that they were doing seemed to fall flat on its face. And by the start of 2020, people had had 2.5 years of this, and Acton National were actually ahead in the polls. The government was going to change back. But then, you know what they say, if you don't think one person can change the world, then maybe you've never tried eating a bat. Because that's when stuff got really crazy. And if I'd said to you 2 years ago, look, we're going to close the border for a couple of years and the government's going to be re-elected for doing it, you would have gone completely nuts. But that's basically what happened. And it happened all around the world. You take Western Australia, you know, people that took a hard line on COVID generally got the rally around the flag effect and got re-elected. So we ended up with the government that we were ready to toss out after 2.5 years, got a second 3 years, got extended to 6. And that's how the series of accidents has put us where we are today. And I think it's really worthwhile understanding that people have got so angry because the way that that government that was ready to be tossed out handled COVID was far from the best in the world. And the reason that people get confused is there's a category error between things that you can control and things that you can't. Has anyone here go to Alcoholics Anonymous? It's a trick question, it's anonymous. If you like, you can say you learned it from St. Francis of Assisi. He said, Lord, give me the courage, you know, I'm very spiritual. Lord, give me the courage to change the things that I can, the serenity to accept the things I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. So have a look at the things that worked during COVID. Well, being an island was pretty good, but I don't think Labor caused that. You know, Jacinda's greatest achievement in some ways is being born on an island. If she'd been born on a continental country and become Prime Minister of that, she would have had a much harder time. The other thing that worked really well was the sacrifice New Zealanders were prepared to make. You know, Auckland in particular spent nearly as many days as London in lockdown. The rest of the country did similar. And then there was the fact that people were prepared to be blocked off from the world. MIQ, in fairness, did actually work. For the most part, it kept the virus out, and when it failed, we just went into another lockdown. Those are the things that worked, the only things that worked. Everything that the government could control was a disaster. I mean, do you remember when St. Ashley was up at the podium saying, oh, now I've just got to get the hair right, hang on. Right, there's no shortage of PPE. And every night you would have doctors and nurses saying, well, I ain't seen any in my hospital lately. And then there was the question of contact tracing. They said, we're going to get 80% of contacts within 96 hours, which was not really a helpful standard because the virus spread faster than that. And we're going to do that up to 1,000 cases. Never got close to it. I think they might have got to 52%, never got close to 80. What's the other thing that's useful? Testing. Never got close to testing the number of people that they needed to. In fact, they spent most of the pandemic criticising saliva testing and rapid antigen testing. Then they spent the second half of the pandemic trying to nick it off people that had been smart enough to import it. You know, that was disastrous. And that left them with vaccination. The most extraordinary thing, Doctors, GPs who vaccinate 700,000 people for the flu every year weren't asked to be part of it. In fact, they had to get invited by or approved by the Ministry of Health to know that, to be shown they knew how to do vaccination. Completely nuts. Who thought that was a good idea? And then there's somehow the mystery of how we got from the front of the queue to the back of the queue, and Chris Hipkins had never explained how that little, multi-billion-dollar mistake occurred, because it necessitated the lockdowns of late 2021. So all of these things that they could have done right were a terrible mistake. But in the meantime, because of those failings, we put huge costs onto New Zealanders. One of them is that with the productive economy shut down, we got by printing and borrowing $60 billion. Today, that money is sloshing around with the second highest inflation in the developed world behind the US, who borrowed and spent even more printed money. So people are feeling that. They're feeling that in their wages, or they're feeling that in their rent, they're feeling that in house prices, they're feeling that even in things that New Zealand produces, like fresh fruit and vegetables, even in places like Hawke's Bay that produce more than anyone. People are feeling it when they go and buy fuel. They're feeling every little thing is a squeeze on their budgets, and it makes them frustrated because they can't afford to do the good things in life, and sometimes they can't afford to do the essential things in life. That's one of the big consequences of COVID that is making people so angry, and it's total financial mismanagement. That's a major issue. But then there's the lack of inclusion and acceptance and calm through our whole population. People have never been less trusting because information was used as a weapon for 2 years. Once they created the fear factory, they had to keep feeding the fear. For example, we now know they had official advice, even from Ashley, who said there's no point in MIQ after November. Lots of people in the community isolating at home. It won't make any difference if you let some people come from overseas and isolate at home too. But they couldn't remove the restrictions because they had to keep the fear and control going. And you look at the way that that has ramped up the division and the distrust in the New Zealand population of each other and of the media and of institutions. And that is seriously damaging for our future. So that, I think, is why people have been left so angry after the last 2 years. An accidental government, accidentally re-elected, got caught in a crisis and decided to pull the one and only lever that they could, forgetting every other aspect of people's welfare and driving people completely mad. And it's going to be felt most acutely amongst the young people. I call them the cheated generation through all of this. Missed so much school, missed so much of being a kid, missed being able to go overseas for several years if they're at that stage of life. They saw house prices rise more than you could possibly have believed, to the point where many of them feel that they have no chance of owning their own part of this country. And then you look at the mental health problems that younger people are facing. I call them the cheated generation, and I'm not surprised the forecast that 50,000 of them are about to go overseas to a place that's got a bit of optimism and get up and go and doesn't use fear to control the population, that offers opportunity and growth and a future for people. I think that's why we're getting more and more younger people coming along to our meetings. I think they're very, very disappointed with the way that the government has managed the last 2 years. And that's why I call them the cheated generation. So, thank you. You're the one I'm working on. But then the other question is, well, what are we actually going to do about it? And my view is that we, first of all, are going to change the government. And I think that will happen for a couple of reasons. It actually started at the start of last year. If you look at the polls and you take Active National versus Labor Green, then that gap's gone from 25 points to the point where it's actually crossed in the last few months. But actually the gap started closing over a year ago now. And the reason it's changed, I think, is because of the most important question in polling: is the country going in the right direction or the wrong direction? Now, those two lines have been narrowing to the point where they too have recently crossed. And so I think the government will change. The question is to what? And that's why we call this the Real Change Tour, because I'm an ACT, not in any other party, because I want to make sure that we don't change the government and kick out Labor so we can babysit their ideas for 3 or 6 or 9 years. I don't want to see Jacinda Ardern. I don't want to see her ideas bedded in the way that John Key allowed Helen Clark's ideas to bed in over 8 years. We actually need real change with an agenda to turn it back. And I would sum it up under 3 banners: a healthier economy, thriving communities, and a Kiwi identity that sets this country up for a future. And I'll go through each one and give you an example of what they mean. When I talk about a healthy economy, I mean one that reconnects effort and reward. Because if you're any of those groups of people, landlord, Al-Qaeda, small business owner, employer, you are a farmer, you're constantly beaten down, regulated and taxed for trying to get ahead and make a difference. And I think that's wrong. I think it's culturally wrong. I think over time it's enormously damaging economically because it stops people believing they can make a difference in their own lives. If they stop believing it, they stop doing it, and the whole prophecy becomes self-fulfilling. So it's absolutely critical that we make sure that effort and reward are reconnected, where people's efforts actually help them get ahead instead of feeling like you're on a treadmill that is turning faster than you could ever run. And that means that we need to zero base the public service. Does anyone know that we've had 14,000 extra bureaucrats in Wellington over the last 4 years? Has anyone noticed the benefits of it? No? Strangely, we need to start asking at the start of every parliament, what do we need? If we didn't have the current government apparatus we've got, would we employ these people again? And I think if we ask the simple question of every public servant, if you didn't exist, who would notice and why, we would find ourselves, except for you, we would find ourselves in a much better place. I think we could get back to the 47,000 we had when Labor were elected, and no one would notice the difference. Now, this doesn't include police, it doesn't include teachers, it doesn't include nurses. This is the public service mainly in Wellington, 61,000 right now on an average salary of $84,000. And Labor says, we don't think we can reduce any expenditure. The public will have to reduce theirs as prices rise. It's completely nuts. I'll just give you one example. Any teachers here incidentally? Forgot to ask. Hello, man. Welcome. Good to have you here. The Ministry of Education, when Labor was elected, had 2,600 working in its offices. Not in schools, in its offices. And I used to make the joke, there's only 2,500 schools. We could reduce it to 100 bureaucrats, send a bureaucrat to each school, and then the principal gets to keep either them or their salary. See how many they keep. Now, as it happens, today we still have 2,500 schools, but we're up to 3,900 full-time equivalents in the Ministry of Education. And as a local MP, I talk to the school principals and they say, these guys aren't a help, they're completely a hindrance. They make things harder all the time. And we think it's time to ask, if the Ministry of Education didn't exist, what would we ask it to do? And I suspect if we built it again from the ground up, it would be half the size, and would be able to give every teacher in New Zealand another couple of grand straight away just from that saving. And they'd be a lot better off if we valued our teachers more, and especially our good teachers, than an ever-growing bureaucracy for no reason. That's just one little example in one sector. And the other thing that they tend to do in Wellington is make rules and regulations that mean it takes longer to get permission to build something than actually build it. We've got to get on top of the regulatory state where people that try to make a difference in their life find themselves constantly jumping through hoops and being asked to comply with the rules that advance the career of someone in Wellington but haven't actually made New Zealand better off overall. Now, if I wanted you all to go home within 5 minutes, I'd start telling you about my regulatory standards bill, a personal favourite, but one that has not always attracted massive amounts of enthusiasm because of its boring technicality. But quasi-constitutional reform, where we start forcing people in Wellington to ask and answer basic questions. What is this law for? What problem does it solve? What benefits and costs does it create? Who pays the costs? Who gets the benefits? If we can't start making those sorts of questions the normal things to ask and answer when making a law, then we're going to have a whole society that spends its life jumping through hoops for some bureaucrat's fantasy rather than the good of themselves and the people they care about. So we've got to change the tax and welfare, tax and regulatory settings that are draining the initiative and the joy from life by punishing people that try to make a difference. And that's what I mean by a healthy economy. But perhaps more important, we need thriving communities. And if I was to sum it up, we say we want a community where no kid's best prospect is being a mob prospect. Because right now, the simple economics tells you that the best thing a lot of kids can do for the skills they've got and the opportunities they have is go and join a gang. And they find the gangs driving around like they own the place, intimidating law-abiding people, even intimidating the police. And we wonder why we've got a problem when we then give them taxpayer money or proceeds of crime money to counsel people to stop taking meth, even though it was them that sold the meth to the addicts in the first place. It's just completely nuts. And we've got to stop taking away police powers. I was talking to a police officer that came to our meeting in Pakuranga, Auckland last night, and he said, no, it's true, because I said, I've heard that police have to ring up the station before they're allowed to arrest someone. He said, no, that's true, they actually do. And you think about it, the whole point about being a police officer is you can arrest people. If you really get down to it, that's the major difference between this guy here and a police officer. You can't arrest someone, a policeman can. That's the major difference. And we've taken that off them, even empowering them to have the discretion to decide when to arrest someone committing a crime. It's just completely crazy. We've got to re-empower our police and stop them trying to fight the gangs with one arm behind their back. But there's something else we've got to do is apply some economics to it. Right now, if you look at what gangs are paying in terms of taxes, it's zero. Civil asset forfeiture, $500 million a P and $50 million worth of assets taken, that's a 10% tax rate. Now, even the ACT Party is not promising legitimate businesses a 10% tax rate. I'd love to, but we can't make it add up. So our policy on gangs and drugs is very simple. If you're on the national gang list and you're dealing drugs and you've got illegal firearms, and they should be illegal, incidentally, how many people here have got a firearm license? Okay, that's not bad. Keep your hand up if you're also on the national gang list. Okay, no, it's true. There's 12. Hey, we lost that guy that was a 1 on re-electing Jacinda. I failed. There were a dozen people, one of our MPs, Nicole McKee, found out there were a dozen people who actually on the national gang list and the firearm register, which is completely nuts. We need to say if you are on the national gang list, you have illegal guns, which by definition you do if you've got them, and you're committing a third crime like dealing drugs, it's open season on your assets and we're going to take your stuff. And people don't want to associate with you because they could lose their stuff. And if you coerce them into associating with you, we'll do you for that as well. Because we've got to stop making it the most profitable game in town for young people for the skills they have to go and join a gang. We've got to apply economics to the stuff, and we've got to get tough on them. We've got to release the police to deal with them. But one of the things we've got to do if we want to release the police is that so many cops spend so much time dealing with what they call dommies, domestics, and effectively being mental health workers. And it can take up a whole day. If they've got someone on a mental health call out, you can get 2 cops in a squad car spending a whole shift trying to look after them. It's actually easier to go and find some crook and just arrest them and put them in jail. It takes far less time. So what we should be doing is saying, how do we get mental health right? And Brooke van Velden, our deputy, I just got to tell you a funny story. I was talking to a woman with long brown hair, and somebody at a previous meeting at a pub just before here over in Napier, and a couple of old duffers see me and they come up and they go to her and they say, "Hello, Brooke." And I think that must be what life is like. But for those poor people who just are at that stage of visual acuity, but good on them. And but what Brooke's come up with in mental health, I think, is very special. She just made a simple observation. $2 billion on mental health every year, and nobody's happy. How on earth can you spend $2 billion and have nobody happy? Well, that's what we've done, because nobody in the entire country has the job of asking whether mental health services have been effective. Did we get a result for the outlay that we did? It's all sprinkled through 1 million institutions with nobody checking up. And Brooke's very simple observation is we need to have something called MHANZ, Mental Health Addictions New Zealand, whose job it is to disperse the money, and their expertise is in using big data and assessment to figure out what works and what doesn't, and if things work, we keep paying them, and if they don't work, then we stop. Seems pretty simple to me, but nobody has thought to do that. We just keep increasing the budgets and wonder why we don't get the outcomes. We've got to do better on mental health in New Zealand if we want to save so many of our other problems. And then after thriving communities by getting tough on crime, investing in education, getting better at mental health, then we've got to think about the third big tranche of what real change means if and when the government changes. And that is, what is our Kiwi identity? And you've got to think about this from the point of view of liberalism. Now, a lot of people don't like to talk about liberalism because the Americans, Churchill said the Americans can always be relied upon to do the right thing after every other avenue has been exhausted. But the Americans have screwed up liberalism because there it means being a Democrat, being a lefty. But liberalism actually is much older than America even. And what it really means is the idea that each person is born alike in dignity, that there's a common humanity that's in all of us, and everybody should be treated equally, regardless of being a member of any particular group. And this is a wonderful way to live. And it's something that we have built our society on over 400 years. Once upon a time, if you had the wrong religion, they burnt you at a stake. No, we've stopped doing that for the most part. Then, once upon a time, if you were a woman, you just had a totally different set of political rights, like none. And we've decided that that probably wasn't so good either. So now we have equal political rights regardless of gender. And throughout history, all sorts of people actually were racist. And they would say that actually, if you're born a different race, you don't have the same rights. A lot of people have come to get away from systems like that. I've spoken to people from South Africa just tonight, and my bet would be that they're here partly to get away from that sort of system. And yet, you look at where we are today, it's suddenly become fashionable to commodify people into identities and say that what group you're a member of is more important than your intrinsic value as a human being. This is, I think, the biggest and most important thing going on in not just New Zealand, but actually in different ways right across the Western world right now. And when I talk about a Kiwi identity, I'm not anti this or anti that. I'm talking about a positive affirmation that to be a New Zealander means that you're born alike in dignity with everyone else who's born or legally immigrates here, and that you should have the same rights and duties. The same rights and duties is what the Treaty of Waitangi says in its 3rd article. So when I talk about a referendum on co-governance, what I'm talking about is a positive affirmation that this country is a place where everybody has the same rights and duties. And I think we should have a referendum and vote on that notion, because it's the only way we're going to get a conversation where people feel they're able to actually speak their mind without being shouted down and called all sorts of terrible things. And I think our country needs to have that conversation, because quietly, in every way, because quietly, in every way, in every sector, we're hearing from people who feel that New Zealand is gradually being commodified into identities where your membership of a group matters more than your common intrinsic value as a human being. And I hear it everywhere. I get doctors who say, well, I swore the Hippocratic Oath and I have a moral duty or an ethical duty to help the patient in front of me regardless of identity. But now I'm being given forms where actually if the right boxes aren't ticked, I'm not allowed to help them. I'm getting university professors, people who often are not actually, traditionally a group falling over themselves to join the evil ACT party, saying, actually, we are supporting you now. We used to support the Greens, but we support you now because we believe in science and academic endeavour. And science and academic endeavour means that no knowledge is ever above being challenged. That's what Galileo thought, but unfortunately for him, he challenged some of the Catholic Church's knowledge, and it didn't go so well for the poor guy. But he was right, in fairness. Now, they're now saying, look, we're being told that Mataranga Māori is above questioning, and that there's two different types of knowledge, and that is not the universal scientific method that has allowed us to put people on the moon and talk to people on the other side of the world using electromagnetic waves. That's not the kind of science that's allowed us to use genetics to multiply food production and prevent everyone from starving. That's the opposite of academic endeavour. It's the opposite of what a university stands for, and we don't like it, and we're supporting ACT. Extraordinary stuff, but it's true. And people are coming to me from the development industry saying we can't get permission to build things unless we go through the motions of so-called principles of the treaty, which actually are not the principles of the treaty unless you take a snapshot in time in the 1980s when Lord Cook of Thorndon invented them. And even there, I've got some very unlikely allies who are saying exactly the same thing I am. Does anyone here know who Dame Anne Salmond is? So she, I think it would be fair to say, is not going to join the ACT Party anytime soon, and probably doesn't vote for us. But she's gone so far left, she's come all the way back round to our side. And she's writing essays that are published helpfully on the Newsroom website that are saying exactly the same thing that I'm saying. The treaty says everyone is equal. The treaty says you have the same rights and duties. The treaty says your taonga is safe. The treaty never said there's a partnership. That was a legal fiction invented in the 80s. It never said that everything should be co-governed. That is something that public servants have invented. Those guys, we're going to fire them, remember? Those guys that they've invented just in the last couple of decades. She is a treaty historian who is saying exactly what I'm saying about the treaty. And that's why I think we should put it up. If Lord Cook of Thorndon can interpret the treaty, then so can you. And that's why we should have a conversation where people get to have a say at the end. In other words, a referendum on what the treaty means. So as usual, I've gone on longer than promised, but we will get to Q&A. But if I was to summarise, we've had an accidental government, accidentally re-elected, accidentally bumbling its way through COVID, and people are seriously pissed. And we saw that tonight just from our little exercise, putting up hands. We nevertheless, because of the forces that are gathering, the trend is I think the government will change. We're calling this real change because the question is, what on earth will it change to? And the fact that we can come out in a free society and have a debate on a Friday night and start talking about what that change looks like and starting it under the banner of a healthy economy and thriving communities and a Kiwi identity, I think that is a positive thing. I think that gives us enormous hope. It gives me enormous optimism that so many people are interested enough to come out and talk about it. And I'm really looking forward to having a bit more of a discussion now where people can add in their part and tell me what it is that they'd like to say. Also, we're turning that off. Okay, we'll see you later. Thank you, Facebook audience. Thank you.